United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken has called on Israel not to occupy Gaza once its war in the Strip against Hamas has come to an end.
The worst fighting in decades follows a surprise attack on Israel by Hamas fighters just over a month ago. Over 11,000 people have been killed from both sides, with the vast majority from Gaza.
Blinken was speaking after a G7 meeting of foreign ministers in Japan today, where he listed what he believes will be issues, or rather that will create a durable peace and security situation in the Middle East.
The United States believes key elements should include no forcible displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. Not now, not after the war. When it comes to post-conflict governance in Gaza, a few things are clear and necessary. One, Gaza cannot continue to be run by Hamas. That simply invites a repetition of October 7th, and Gaza used as a place from which to launch terrorist attacks. It's also clear that Israel cannot occupy Gaza.
Let's talk more about that now with international relations expert and associate editor at the Daily Maverick, Brooks Spector. Brooks, a very good evening to you. Welcome back to News at Prime. So, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, in an interview with American media this week, spoke about how there will be a lingering or remaining, if you will, security responsibility by Israel in Gaza once the war, it says, against Hamas has come to an end. What exactly would that mean? Is that reoccupation?
Oh, good evening. Good to be with you. No one is actually quite sure what a lingering security responsibility actually means. I've spent most of the day trying to pin something like that down precisely, and what I conclude is, perhaps unfortunately, is that the Israeli government is now trying to figure out precisely what it expects will happen once they have defeated, captured, killed, or arrested Hamas fighters. The problem, of course, is after that happens, what happens? Who provides the basic governmental structure, the rebuilding, the reconstruction, the repatriation of people who've been moved one way or another throughout the territory. And none of that is as yet clear. And you heard Antony Blinken making the U.S. government's position clearer than it has been right at the beginning. But it is not, I'm sorry, I repeat myself, it certainly is not clear what Benjamin Netanyahu means precisely with a lingering security presence. The continuum of that ranges pretty widely, and I suspect some of that will be hotly contested and argued among Israeli publics as well as Israeli politicians, and of course just as hotly debated among Americans and other interested foreign parties. So we're in a world of terminological inexactitude at best.
And that is the issue oftentimes at war, isn't it? That it's one thing to start a war, but ending it and knowing how it will end and what the future will look like is often much harder to determine.
Well, I mean, it's pretty easy to start shooting at each other. You're absolutely right. And then figuring out, okay, how do we stop this? How do we stop the killing and the carnage and the destruction? And then, as I have been saying, moving on to chapter 2 or the third act, what happens next? And I mean, at some point along the way, various Arab nations, especially the Gulf states, are going to be implored and asked if they cannot lend a hand in financial and economic terms. At some point along the way, the Israelis are going to be asked and asking among themselves, what exactly do we expect to have happen? People in Gaza obviously deserve a chance to have some say in the matter too, of course. And they certainly have not had an elected government of their own since 2006. There hasn't been an election thereafter. And various other nations, the European Union will want to have some say in the matter as well. And of course, the United Nations and some of its arms and agencies will end up being involved one way or another. And you can tick off all the different responsibilities that are incumbent on a territory. They range from basic security to the supply of basic utilities, what we call in this country service delivery, personal security, creating a political stable future. And of course, sadly, none of that's clear right now.
Right. So the Reuters news agency published an article today quoting an unnamed Israeli official who said there was no intention to reoccupy Gaza. But I wonder if, once again, to my earlier question, the intention to then have an extended security presence post the end of this war and occupation would mean the same thing. And if so, what do the Americans and the other Israeli allies do who've made it clear that they are opposed to reoccupation?
Well, I'm not absolutely sure the premise of your question is 100% accurate. An extended security presence and occupation may not, in fact, be exactly the same thing. An extended security presence might well speak to strict and thorough border control and control of airspace, but not physical presence on the ground in the territory of Israeli forces. I mean, these things are all so much up in the air right now. You, I, and many other people, we're all going to be talking about this for days, weeks, months to come, what exactly transpires. I think first, though, the end of the fighting is important. The end of the rockets being fired into Israel proper is important. The return of the hostages, that also needs to be adjudicated even before we get to the question of what happens to and on the territory going forward. I'm not trying to be vague or avoid your question. I'm just trying to point to all the different. It's a chain of events, and none of us knows precisely where it leads.
Let me ask you about something else that's come out of the Israeli government today, again from the Reuters news agency, saying the defense minister Yoav Gallant has said that at the end of the war, the Israeli army will have, quote, absolute freedom of action in Gaza without limitations or operations. Without limitations on operations, excuse me. Again, not easy to tell what exactly that will entail, but how much appetite will there be for any sort of unlimited operation by the Israelis post the official end of the war from its allies? Because again, even President Biden had said occupation is what they don't want to see happen. So have they lost control of their ally? Is there anyone who can stop it at this point?
Well, I think you're quite right that the Americans will not support such a position. And it's true that in the current Israeli cabinet, even with what's been termed a unity government, there are some members of the cabinet who have a tendency to speak in almost apocalyptic terms. And whether they actually speak for the entire government and its actions, is a different question. We also tend to talk about it as if Israel is sort of one unified thing, when in fact it's a country in which there are lots of competing political ideas among the citizens, among the electorate, among supporters of different parties. And so it's not clear to me, at least in terms of people I've talked to, it's not clear to me that such statements carry the full weight of the population behind them. What is clear is that repatriation of the hostages, ending of Hamas's threat, and ending the rockets, those are things that I think you would, if you took a poll of Israelis, they would all agree on that. But what the minister you quoted saying as policies that would be supported by all Israelis, I really don't think that's accurate. We have to remember too that the Israelis have already left Gaza at least once, and that was I'm trying to remember the precise date now, around the time of the Hamas election, so
They
2005
left
or
in 2005, yes. That's when they ended the occupation previously.
And there's not a whole lot of appetite, as far as I can tell, for a reoccupation in the traditional or standard sense of the word. You talk about the West Bank, that becomes a very different set of questions, of course.
Brooks Spector, good to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time as always.